Hello, survivors. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the story. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to our channel. We appreciate it, and thank you in advance. Please leave the name of the city you're listening from in the comment section below. It helps us see our reach in the community. Let's start the story. I was soldering the final connection on my newest drone when the first alert pinged on my phone. It was 5:43 a.m., and I'd been up all night working, a common occurrence in my small apartment that doubled as my workshop. 3 monitors glowed in the dim light, casting blue shadows across the cluttered space. The smell of solder and hot electronics hung in the air, familiar and comforting. The notification was a local emergency alert. Multiple traffic incidents reported downtown. Avoid Central Business District. Nothing unusual for Chicago on a weekday morning, but something about the wording felt off. I flicked on the police scanner app I kept on my tablet, old habits from my security consulting days, and continued tightening the prop mounts on my newest creation. My name is Aiden. I design surveillance drones for a living, or at least I did before going freelance last year. Now I build custom units for select clients who don't ask too many questions about specifications that might push legal boundaries. Privacy laws are tricky with aerial surveillance, but there's always someone willing to pay for eyes in the sky. The police chatter grew increasingly chaotic over the next 20 minutes. Multiple officers calling in what sounded like violent assaults, requesting backup across several locations simultaneously. The dispatcher's voice maintained professional calm, but I could hear the strain. When she mentioned sending all available units to Chicago Memorial Hospital, my fingers paused over the circuit board. Repeat, we have reports of multiple violent individuals at Chicago Memorial. Responding officers requesting immediate backup. Be advised, suspects showing extreme aggression and resistance to standard compliance measures. Something cold settled in my stomach. The hospital was just 4 blocks from my apartment. I switched my largest monitor to the local news. Nothing yet. Too early for the morning broadcast. Social media was already lighting up, though. A video from someone's dash cam showed a man attacking a city bus, pounding on the door with bloody hands. The timestamp showed it was filmed just 13 minutes ago. My phone buzzed with a text from my only real friend in the city, Jordy, a fellow tech specialist who supplied parts for my more specialized builds. "You seeing this shit? Something's happening downtown." I texted back. "On the scanner now, sounds bad. You safe?" "At home in Lincoln Park, staying put. You should do the same." I moved to the window of my 6th floor apartment and pulled back the curtain. The pre-dawn streets looked normal at first glance. A few cars, early morning commuters hurrying to the L station. Then I noticed an ambulance stopped at an odd angle in the intersection. Its lights were flashing, but it wasn't moving. A figure, paramedic I assumed, was slumped against the driver's side wheel. That's when I knew I needed eyes up high. I grabbed my most reliable drone, the Sparrow, a custom quadcopter with an extended battery life, enhanced stabilization, and a 4K camera with thermal imaging capabilities. It was small enough to be relatively quiet, but powerful enough to handle Chicago's unpredictable winds. Within minutes, I had it ready on my small balcony. Controller in hand, goggles positioned. The Sparrow lifted smoothly into the air, ascending to about 150 feet. I guided it toward Chicago Memorial, the feed displaying on both my goggles and the main monitor. The streets below were eerily empty for what should have been the start of rush hour. As the hospital came into view, I nearly dropped the controller. The emergency entrance was in chaos. 3 police cruisers with flashing lights were positioned haphazardly near the doors. A crowd of people, at least 30, pressed against the entrance. At first, I thought it was a mass casualty event, people rushing to get help, but the movement patterns were wrong. They weren't helping each other or rushing inside in panic. They were attacking the doors, clawing at them, pressing against the glass. I lowered the drone for a better view, keeping a safe distance. The camera zoomed in on the entrance. 2 officers were attempting to control the crowd, but they were overwhelmed. As I watched, one officer fired his weapon into the chest of a man who kept advancing. The man stumbled but didn't fall. Instead, he lunged forward with startling speed and tackled the officer to the ground. My pulse hammered in my ears. This wasn't a riot or panic, it was something else entirely. I piloted the drone in a wide circle around the hospital perimeter. The back service entrance told a different story. Medical staff were fleeing, running to their cars, or simply away from the building. Some were helping patients, but others were just running. Pure survival instinct. A doctor in bloodied scrubs stumbled across the parking lot, pursued by a limping figure in a hospital gown. I watched, unable to look away as the pursuer caught up and took the doctor down with shocking violence. The feed was clear enough to see teeth tearing into flesh. Jesus, I whispered to the empty apartment. My phone was now constantly buzzing with emergency alerts. Police were advising all residents to stay indoors. No explanation given, just the standard "avoid the affected areas" language. But what were the affected areas? The drone feed suggested the answer was rapidly becoming everywhere. I called Jordy. "You seeing this?" I asked when he picked up. "Yeah," his voice was unusually tight. "It's not just downtown, reports coming in from the suburbs too. They're saying it's some kind of outbreak." "Outbreak? Like what, rabies?" I guided the Sparrow higher, getting a broader view of the city. Small clusters of violence were visible in several locations now, spreading outward from the hospital like ripples in a pond. No idea. But people are saying once you're bitten, you turn violent within minutes. It's spreading fast. The word neither of us was saying hung in the air between us. It was too absurd, too much like the movies. But what else could explain what I was seeing? "Stay inside," I told him. "Lock everything. I'm going to keep the drones up, monitor the situation." After hanging up, I launched my second drone, the Raven, larger, with better range and battery life. I sent it toward the downtown core while keeping the Sparrow circling near my neighborhood. The feeds displayed side by side on my monitors created a surreal picture of a city descending into chaos. Downtown was worse, much worse. The normally bustling streets were now scenes from a nightmare. Cars abandoned in intersections, some still running. People fleeing on foot, others giving chase with a terrible single-mindedness. The pursuers moved oddly, some sprinting with uncoordinated aggression, others shuffling but relentless, all of them focused only on catching the unaffected. A city bus had crashed into a department store front. As I watched, people poured out of the shattered doors, running in all directions. 3 figures emerged from the bus itself, moving with that same horrible purpose. One caught a woman who had tripped on the curb. I turned the drone away, unable to watch what happened next. The reality of my situation began to sink in. I was alone in my apartment, 6 floors up, witnessing the beginning of something catastrophic. I had food for maybe 2 weeks if I rationed carefully. Water would be a problem if the utilities failed. My apartment door was solid, but the lock was standard. It wouldn't hold against determined force. I switched to the Sparrow's feed. My neighborhood was quieter, but for how long? The camera caught movement on my street. A mail carrier running, looking back over his shoulder in terror. Nothing appeared to be chasing him, but his fear was palpable even from this height. The sun was fully up now, illuminating a changed world. It had been less than an hour since the first alert, but everything was different. Everything. I took stock of my situation. I had 5 drones of various capabilities. Enough food for 2 weeks, maybe 3 if I stretched it. Tools that could be repurposed as weapons if needed. And I had information. My eyes in the sky were showing me what most people couldn't see. Trapped in their homes with only official statements and social media panic to guide them. Knowledge is power, they say. But as I watched the city I'd called home for the past 6 years fall apart through the clinical detachment of a camera lens, I wasn't feeling particularly powerful. The Raven's battery warning blinked. I guided it back toward my apartment, my mind racing. I needed a plan. Staying put made sense for now, but for how long? What if this didn't blow over? What if whatever was happening continued to spread? As the drone approached my building, its camera caught movement on the roof of the adjacent structure. A maintenance worker was fighting off an attacker near the rooftop access door. The worker swung a wrench, connecting with his assailant's head with a force that should have been fatal. The attacker stumbled back, but didn't go down. Instead, he lunged again, seemingly unfazed by what should have been a devastating blow. The worker turned to run, but there was nowhere to go. The attacker was between him and the access door. In desperation, the worker backed toward the edge of the roof. I wanted to look away but couldn't. The attacker rushed forward and both figures disappeared over the edge. I set the controller down, my hands shaking. 6 stories up suddenly didn't feel high enough. My phone vibrated again. Another emergency alert. This one different from the others. This is a mandatory shelter-in-place order for all Chicago residents. Lock all doors and windows. Do not attempt to leave your home. Do not open your door for anyone. Emergency services are overwhelmed. Further instructions will follow. Further instructions. Right. I'd seen enough to know that further instructions might never come. Whatever was happening was spreading too quickly for containment. The authorities were already overwhelmed. I looked at my small arsenal of drones, and then at my tools. I had always been good with my hands, able to build and modify technology to suit my needs. Now, I needed to adapt in a different way. First, I secured my apartment. I moved my heavy workbench against the door. I checked the balcony door twice, ensuring it was locked. I filled every container I could find with water, just in case. Then I returned to my monitors, to my eyes in the sky. Knowledge is power, I reminded myself. And right now, knowledge was the only power I had. 7 hours into the crisis, and I was beginning to understand the patterns. Through my network of drones, I'd witnessed the same scenario play out dozens of times. One person attacks another with inhuman aggression, biting and tearing. The victim, if not killed outright, transforms within minutes, sometimes seconds, and joins the ranks of the attackers. Infection. That was the only explanation that made sense. Some kind of pathogen transmitted through bites that rewired the brain with terrifying speed. I'd been cycling my drones to maintain constant surveillance, charging one while the others were in the air. The Sparrow kept watch over my immediate neighborhood, while I'd sent the Raven on increasingly wider sweeps of the surrounding area. My third drone, the Falcon, a robust quadcopter with reinforced carbon fiber frame and extended flight capabilities, was tracking the spread of the infection across the northern section of the city. The picture it painted wasn't good. The Willis Tower had gone dark. Fires burned unchecked in several neighborhoods. The Chicago River bridges were either raised or blocked with abandoned vehicles. The L trains had stopped running. Cell service was spotty, and my internet connection flickered in and out. I'd managed to reach Jordy twice more before communications degraded. He was still secure in his Lincoln Park apartment, but had seen multiple infected in his building. He'd barricaded himself in his bathroom when they started breaking down doors in his hallway. "I don't think I'm getting out of this one. Aiden," he'd said during our last call, his voice unnaturally calm. "Just wanted to say you were always a solid friend." The line had gone dead before I could respond. I'd tried calling back several times, but the calls failed to connect. The Falcon's feed currently showed a massive horde converging on Millennium Park. Hundreds of infected, drawn by something I couldn't identify. Then I saw it. A military helicopter had landed in the open space, and soldiers were attempting to evacuate civilians. Even from this distance, I could tell it wasn't going well. That's when something new caught my attention on the Raven's feed. A military convoy was pushing through the streets about 10 blocks from my building. 3 Humvees leading, followed by 2 transport trucks, with a tank bringing up the rear. They were moving methodically, the soldiers clearing a path through abandoned vehicles and the occasional cluster of infected. The lead Humvee suddenly stopped. Through the drone's camera, I saw why. A massive horde of infected had spilled out from a shopping center ahead. The soldiers took defensive positions, their weapons trained on the approaching threat. The first volley of gunfire echoed through the streets. The front line of infected dropped, but the rest kept coming. The soldiers retreated to their vehicles as the infected closed the distance with surprising speed. The convoy began a hasty reversal, the tank's turret rotating to face the oncoming threat. A thunderous blast sent a shell into the center of the horde, creating a momentary gap in their ranks. But there were too many. The infected swarmed over the lead Humvee, forcing their way inside through windows and doors. The tank continued its retreat, firing continuously but unable to stem the tide. It backed into an intersection, attempting a turn, when a nearby fuel truck exploded. The blast must have been triggered by stray fire from the tank's machine gun. The tank veered sharply, its tracks grinding against parked cars. I realized with a jolt that it was now heading directly toward my street, toward my building. I quickly switched to the Sparrow's feed, which showed my building's entrance. The street below was relatively clear. Most of the infected had been drawn to the sounds of the battle. The tank appeared at the end of the block, its engine roaring as it picked up speed. 2 soldiers were visible in the open turret, firing back at pursuing infected. The tank wasn't slowing down. Whether from damaged controls or deliberate intent, it was heading straight for my building. I watched, helpless, as it crashed through the entrance with devastating force, its bulk wedging firmly in the shattered doorway. The impact shook my entire apartment, causing books and equipment to tumble from shelves. When the dust settled, I could see the tank was completely stuck, forming an impassable barrier in what used to be the entrance lobby. The 2 soldiers in the turret were no longer visible. A strange relief washed over me as I realized what this meant. The infected couldn't get in. The tank had effectively sealed the building's main entrance. Then I noticed movement on the Sparrow's feed. The tank's hatch was opening. A bloodied arm emerged, followed by a helmeted head. One of the soldiers had survived and was pulling himself out of the tank. He dropped to the ground inside the lobby, clearly injured but alive. He checked his sidearm, then limped deeper into the building, disappearing from the drone's view. I checked the situation outside. The horde that had been pursuing the convoy was now spreading out. A smaller group was converging on my building, drawn by the crash, but they couldn't get past the tank's massive bulk. An idea began to form in my mind. That tank contained weapons, ammunition, possibly communications equipment that still worked. And there was at least one soldier alive inside my building, someone with training who might know more about what was happening. Decision made. I grabbed my emergency backpack and added a few tools that might be useful. I slipped my largest screwdriver into my belt. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. The hallway was empty and eerily quiet. Emergency lighting cast a dim glow, suggesting the building's power was now running on backup generators. I moved cautiously toward the stairwell, listening for any sound that might indicate danger, or the surviving soldier. 6 flights of stairs later, I reached the lobby level. The scene was one of devastation. The tank had plowed through the front entrance, crushing everything in its path. Concrete dust hung in the air, and embedded in the middle of it all was the massive green bulk of the tank, creating an impassable barrier. I could see daylight through gaps around the tank's hull, along with grasping hands and twisted faces as infected tried unsuccessfully to squeeze through. Their moans were muffled, but constant. I followed a blood trail that led to the maintenance room. The door was ajar. "Hello?" I called softly. "I'm not infected. I live in the building." A gun appeared in the doorway, followed by the soldier's face. Young, maybe mid-20s, with a deep gash across his forehead. "Stay back," he warned, his voice strained. "How do I know you're not infected?" "The infected don't talk," I pointed out. "They don't use tools, and they don't move carefully. I've been watching them all day." He studied me for a moment, then lowered the gun slightly. "Watching them how?" "I have drones," I explained. "I've been monitoring the city since early this morning. I saw your convoy get hit. I saw the tank crash into the building." The mention of the convoy made his face darken. "Everyone else is dead. Overrun." He slumped against the wall, revealing a bloodstain spreading across his lower abdomen. "Are you bitten?" I asked, taking an involuntary step back. He shook his head. "Shrapnel, from when we hit the building." He grimaced in pain. "Got a first aid kit up in your place?" I nodded. "I can treat that wound, but first, the tank. Does it have weapons we can salvage? Communications equipment?" The soldier laughed weakly. Straight to business, huh? Yeah, there's a cache. Rifles, sidearms, some explosives, standard kit. Radio's busted, though. Explosives? I repeated, my mind racing with possibilities. Few grenades, some C4. Rocket for the tank's main gun, but good luck figuring out how to use that. He studied my expression. What are you thinking? I'm thinking we can use what's in that tank, I said. Not just to defend ourselves, but maybe to help others. My drones can see people trapped all over the city. With the right payloads, maybe they could do more than just watch. The soldier, who introduced himself as Connor, looked skeptical but didn't argue. His immediate concern was his wound, and mine was getting back to my apartment with whatever we could salvage from the tank. It took us nearly 20 minutes to retrieve what we needed. The space was cramped and smelled of diesel and blood, but the cache was impressive. 2 military-grade rifles with ammunition, 3 handguns, 6 grenades, blocks of C4 explosive, detonators, and even 2 small mortars with rounds. We stuffed everything into bags from the lobby gift shop and began the slow journey back up the stairs. Pierce struggled, requiring frequent stops, but eventually we made it to my apartment. I treated his wound as best I could with my first aid kit. "So what's your big plan with all this?" Connor asked as I finished bandaging him. "Those drones of yours can't carry rifles." "No," I agreed, "but they can carry grenades. Small explosive charges, even the mortars if I modify my largest drone." I gestured to the parts spread across my workbench. "I build custom drones. I can make them do things the commercial models can't." I pulled up the feeds from my active drones, showing him what I'd been watching all day. "Look here." I pointed to a group of civilians barricaded in a convenience store, surrounded by infected pounding on the glass. "These people have been trapped for hours. The glass won't hold much longer." I switched to another feed. "This family is on a rooftop. They fled up the fire escape, but infected are starting to figure out the route." I looked Pierce in the eye. "I can't save everyone, but if I can drop explosives precisely where they're needed, create distractions, clear paths, I might save some." Connor was silent for a long moment, studying the drone feeds. Finally, he nodded. "Better than sitting here waiting to die, I guess." For the next 2 hours, we worked side by side. I modified my drones to carry various payloads, grenades dangling from simple release mechanisms I could trigger remotely, smaller explosive charges, even a simple delivery system for small supply packages. The largest modification was to my flagship drone, the Eagle. It was a hexacopter nearly 3 feet in diameter, designed for heavy lifting. With some careful engineering, I managed to create a mounting system for one of the mortars. It wouldn't be able to fire directly, but it could position the tube and drop rounds into it, creating a mobile artillery platform. Connor, despite his injury, proved knowledgeable about the explosives, showing me how to arm them safely and explaining their effective radius. "They're calling them zombies, you know," Connor said suddenly, nodding toward my monitor where the Falcon's feed showed a particularly gruesome scene. "Before command went dark, that's what they were saying, like something out of a horror movie." "Zombies," I repeated, testing the word. It felt ridiculous, like something from fiction, but it also fit what I was seeing. The mindless aggression, the spreading through bites, the apparent immunity to pain. If not zombies, what else could they be? "Whatever they are, conventional tactics don't work," Connor continued. "Bullets slow them down, but only headshots stop them completely. Fireworks, explosives too. But there are so many." His voice trailed off. I checked the time. Just past noon. Not even 7 hours since the first alert on my phone, and the world had transformed beyond recognition. "We should test these modifications," I said, securing the last release mechanism on the Raven. "Start small, see if we can help people closest to us first." I launched the modified Raven from my balcony, its weight slightly increased by the grenades attached to its undercarriage. Through my monitor, I watched it climb steadily. I directed it toward a nearby intersection where a group of about 20 infected had cornered 3 survivors in a transit bus. The survivors noticed my drone as it hovered above them. One pointed upward, their face a mixture of confusion and desperate hope. They couldn't know what was coming, couldn't understand how I had weaponized technology meant for photography and surveillance. I positioned the Raven carefully, aligning it above the densest cluster of infected surrounding the bus. My finger hovered over the release command. I took a deep breath, exchanged a look with Connor, and pressed the button. The grenade dropped, falling with terrifying accuracy into the middle of the horde. The explosion ripped through the air, sending infected bodies flying in all directions. The grenade's blast created a precise circle of destruction, dropping at least a dozen infected instantly. The survivors in the bus stared in shock, then at my hovering drone. "Direct hit," Connor murmured. "Those people might actually have a chance now." The remaining infected had been scattered, momentarily confused. The survivors seized their opportunity, rushing toward a nearby office building with a heavy security door. I kept the Raven hovering overhead until they were safely inside. "It worked," I said, the reality sinking in. "We actually saved them." Over the next few hours, we developed a system. I kept my unmodified drones scanning for survivors in peril, while the weaponized drones provided strategic support. Our first real test came when the Falcon spotted about 30 survivors barricaded in a school gymnasium, surrounded by infected steadily breaking through windows. There were children among them. Too many infected for grenades alone, Connor assessed. But if we used the mortar to create a diversion, I positioned the Eagle 2 blocks away, dropping a mortar round into an abandoned gas station. The resulting explosion was massive. The sound drew hundreds of infected away from the school, creating what Connor called a clearing corridor, a temporary safe path for evacuation. I used the Raven to drop a note on the gym roof. "North exit clear for 5 minutes. Run now." We watched as the survivors read the message and made their escape through the route we'd created. Not everyone made it. An elderly man fell behind, and 2 adults went back for him. None re-emerged, but 27 people, including 11 children, reached safety. I forced myself to focus on those we'd saved rather than those we'd lost. Word spread quickly. People began looking up when they heard my drones overhead. Some waved frantically. Others held up signs reading "Help" or "Need medical." I couldn't assist them all, but I prioritized groups with children or those in imminent danger. As night fell, Connor spotted another military convoy moving down Lakeshore Drive. Unlike the earlier convoy, this one had a clear perimeter defense. They were evacuating civilians from pickup points along their route. "We need to contact them," I said. Connor suggested using the drones to signal the convoy. I sent the Sparrow on a precise grid pattern above my building. After 20 minutes, a helicopter detached from the convoy, approaching cautiously. Connor found a signal mirror and made his way to the roof while I kept the Sparrow flying. Through the drone's camera, I watched as he used the mirror to flash a military identification code. The helicopter circled once, then descended. 5 minutes later, Connor burst back into my apartment, energized despite his injury. "They're setting up a forward command post at Soldier Field," he explained, "evacuating civilians to secure zones, but they're having trouble with crowd control. Too many infected swarming their extraction points." I understood immediately, and our drones could help create those clearing corridors. For the next 12 hours, we worked non-stop, coordinating with the military's extraction operations. I guided my drones to their pickup points, using the remaining explosives to create diversions that drew infected away from evacuation routes. Connor worked the radio, relaying intelligence to the ground teams. Each hour brought reports of successful extractions. Echo Team, 42 civilians secured. Bravo Position, 37 civilians en route to Green Zone. By dawn, we'd helped evacuate over 600 people. My apartment had transformed into an improper command center, with maps spread across every surface. Connor had been joined by a communications specialist named Peters, dispatched to help maintain our connection with the main operation. But our resources were dwindling. The drone batteries were wearing down, and we were down to our last few explosives. "Command says they're pulling back to the perimeter by 1800 hours, Peters informed us. "City's falling too fast. They're setting up a final extraction point at Soldier Field for anyone who can make it there." Connor looked at me. That includes us. They're sending a vehicle to extract all personnel from forward positions. I hesitated, looking at my monitors. The Falcon's feed showed at least 100 civilians still trying to reach extraction points. The Raven was tracking a school bus full of children that had broken down just 6 blocks from a pickup point. "We can still help them," I said. "We have 3 grenades left. We can create enough of a diversion to get those kids to safety." Connor studied the feed. "Extraction team will be here in 2 hours. If we commit our last resources now..." "I know," I said quietly. "We might not be able to clear our own way out when the time comes." I wasn't military. I wasn't personnel. I was just a guy with drones who'd found a way to help. And those kids on the bus, they'd die without that help. "Get those last grenades ready," I told Connor. My decision made. The next 2 hours were a blur of coordinated movements. We used our remaining explosives strategically, creating precisely timed diversions that allowed the stranded civilians to reach safety. The school bus made it to the extraction point with minutes to spare. When the extraction team arrived, Connor and Peters were packed and ready. I wasn't. "Come on, man," Connor urged. "This isn't a debate, the city is falling. Once that convoy leaves, there's no coming back." I gestured to my monitors. "My drones still have battery life. I can still guide people, even without explosives. I can show them safe routes." "And then what? When the batteries die? When your food runs out?" I had no good answer, just a certainty that I couldn't abandon those people while I still had the means to help them. In the end, Connor recognized my stubbornness. With a muttered curse, he handed me his sidearm and remaining ammunition. "Command will maintain the emergency frequency for another 48 hours, he said. "If you change your mind, call in. They'll try to send an extraction team." I nodded, knowing it probably wouldn't happen. "What you've done here, it mattered," he said quietly. "Remember that when things get dark." Then they were gone. I returned to my workstation, alone again except for the mechanical hum of my drones and the radio's chatter. I guided as many survivors as I could toward the final extraction point. I watched through the Falcon's camera as the military convoy departed, carrying hundreds of rescued civilians away from the dying city. As night fell, the batteries on my drones began failing one by one. Only the Sparrow remained, and its battery indicator was flashing red. I guided it back toward my building. As it approached, the feed showed me something alarming. The street around my building was now filled with infected. Dozens of them, drawn perhaps by the constant coming and going of the extraction team earlier. I was trapped. The Sparrow's battery died moments later, the screen going black. I sat in silence, surrounded by dark monitors that had been my windows to the outside world. I stayed in my apartment, determined to help more people with my drones. Day after day, I worked tirelessly to guide survivors through safe routes, even without explosives to clear paths. But gradually, the drones began to deteriorate. Battery life shortened with each recharge cycle, motors strained from constant use, camera feeds became unreliable, pixelated, then completely non-functional on some units. One by one, my mechanical eyes shut down permanently. The radio crackled occasionally with reports from the retreating convoy. They'd successfully extracted over 2,000 civilians from the downtown area, thanks in part to the corridors we'd created with the drones. I took inventory. Food for perhaps 2 weeks. Water was still running, though the pressure had dropped significantly. Power was intermittent, but my apartment had enough battery backups to keep essential equipment running. 3 days later, I heard something strange on the military frequency. Survivors trading information, unauthorized users who'd gotten hold of military-grade radios. And they were talking about me. "Anyone near downtown should look for the drone signals," a woman's voice said. "The guy operating them, they're calling him the Plastic Dragon. He helped create a safe corridor that saved my entire neighborhood." "Plastic Dragon?" another voice responded. "Yeah, because of the drones, they look like plastic dragons flying overhead. My kid called them that and it stuck." I smiled despite myself. The Plastic Dragon. It wasn't the most flattering nickname, but I'd take it. As weeks passed, the military frequency went silent, but the survivor network grew stronger. They reported that secure zones had been established outside major cities, with the military holding defensive perimeters. The infected outside my building never dispersed. My food dwindled faster than I'd hoped. The water stopped completely on day 17, leaving me with only what I'd stored in containers. On day 23, I heard a transmission that gave me pause. "This is Green Zone Bravo to any survivors in the Chicago downtown area. We are establishing a resupply corridor along Michigan Avenue on August 16th. Repeat, resupply corridor on Michigan Avenue, August 16th at 800 hours. Look for the smoke signals. Extraction possible for small groups. Over, August 16th. That was tomorrow. I looked at my remaining supplies, then at the dead drones. With careful work, I might be able to get one flying again. Not for long, but maybe long enough to scout a route to Michigan Avenue. The odds weren't good. The streets were filled with infected. But it was a chance, the first real chance I'd had since the convoy left. As I began working on the Sparrow, I found myself thinking about all the people we'd helped, all the lives saved because I'd stayed behind, because I'd had eyes in the sky when everyone else was trapped at ground level. The plastic dragon. It wasn't such a bad legacy, even if I didn't make it out alive. I worked through the night, bringing the Sparrow back to life. By dawn, it was ready. Not at full capacity, but functional. I'd have maybe 15 minutes of flight time, enough for one reconnaissance run. As the sun rose on August 16th, I stepped onto my balcony, the drone in my hands, and looked out at the ruined city. Smoke was visible in the distance, the promised signal from the resupply corridor. It was perhaps a mile away, a journey through infected-filled streets. I launched the Sparrow one last time, watching as it rose shakily into the morning sky. Through my goggles, I could see the path ahead, searching for a route with the fewest infected. My supplies were packed, Connor's pistol secured at my hip. The Sparrow's battery indicator was already flashing. As I guided it toward the smoke signals, a sense of calm settled over me. Whatever happened next, I'd done something that mattered. When the world fell apart, I'd found a way to help. Not with brute force or heroics, but with technology and precision, with eyes in the sky that saw what no one else could see. Before the screen went dark, I caught a glimpse of something in the distance. Vehicles with military markings near the smoke signals, and figures in tactical gear securing the area. The extraction team was real. They were actually there. The monitor went black as the Sparrow's battery died. I stood on my balcony, staring in the direction I'd seen the vehicles, calculating distances and obstacles in my mind. It would be dangerous, perhaps impossible, but for the first time in weeks, I had something I'd been missing, a destination. I took one last look at my apartment, at the workbench where I'd built my drones, at the monitors that had been my windows to the world. Then I shouldered my pack, checked Connor's pistol, and headed for the door. The plastic dragon was making one last flight.